Hello and welcome back to On the Soul's Terms, and a couple of special things about this episode. Firstly, the where. Right now I'm sitting in a little town in the Peloponnese of Greece called Epidavros. It's very, very close to the Asclepian temple and the ancient theatre and the healing chambers and the Abaton and all this really amazing stuff around this part of the world. And it's special here. It's beautiful. You can feel it in the earth around here. You can understand why they might set up a temple here in dedication to the god of dreaming and healing and medicine. The ancestor of the Western medicine world actually goes all the way back to Asclepius and Chiron, and who knows where else it goes down into the earth. So that's one of the where, and the second pretty amazing thing here is the who. I happen to be with Collette Davis, who's agreed to sit down with me today and wax fairy tale language. Collette, welcome.
Hi. Thanks for having me. And yeah, as you were just introducing the land, and you had me dreaming into the olive trees and the deep blue and the mountain, the wrapping of the mountain that's here that I've just been dancing with. Yeah, and it feels like such grounding land, and we nearly didn't land here. We nearly ended up going somewhere else, but it's just the right place to be. And thanks for inviting me in.
Yeah, we're actually on a olive tree eco farm right now, called Athena Eco Farm. And it's this kind of stone hut, I guess, out in the hills.
It's a cave.
It's a cave, yeah, we're in the cave. Seems like a pretty amazing spot and place and time to talk fairy tale. And I was just talking to Collette about the third house, and we were just talking about it, of like what it is, and you know, part of it being that time, as far as a time when the sun passes through midnight to 2 a.m, it passes through this particular house, and so it's really the deep still of night. And a place where there's nursery rhymes and rhythms and stories down here, and our early childhood experiences and our siblings and our really early friends, and those people that are our peers around the same age, and what it's like to be around them, and what it's like to sort of revisit that mind and feel that mind. And yeah, when I was first thinking about the third house and the fairy tale, I was thinking about doing something around echo. And it's a beautiful story, echo, and one that actually came up between Collette and I today by chance as well. But in the end, I pivoted away from that idea, and I'm moving into Hansel and Gretel today. And it's great to do this with you because we have a bit of a twin sibling dance that we do. You know, Collette and I have worn many hats, and we're about to teach together. Well, teach or facilitate. Not really going to teach, are we?
No.
We're not going to teach much.
We're gonna learn.
We're going to learn. We're going to take people into this area of learning, this 12 till 2 a.m. kind of place. And remembering, aren't we? And that's what Collette calls part of what she does, you know, in the Samavesa community. Part of what she does is the remembership. And a lot of what you do is could be located in this house in a way. The deep remembering the lunar frequencies that are down here, getting into certain somatic channels, getting into parts of the body, getting into the cellular memory, right? All of that kind of stuff.
All of that, yeah. And the sibling nature, the sisterhood that's so present in the community. Yeah, and also we're in this Gemini time as well. Yeah, and also I don't know so much about the house as well, so it's also beautiful to be here, like sinking into it with you, and being in that siblinghood, that twinning, and that playfulness that's there, and that support that's there, and that co-creation that's there. And being kind of birthed out of something, a sense of being birthed out of a common ground. That's really so alive in the Samavesha community, where it's really those that are the witches and the outliers and the ones that sit on the edge of the forest that find their way there. And many of the facilitators in that beautiful circle are guiding people into the depths, and probably could be located in that place between 12 and 2.
And into intuition and into the feeling function and everything this world is sort of left behind or forgotten or put as less than. And I feel the movement towards that place, the movement into and towards that place,
which is the remembering, right? yeah
And I guess as we go into fairy tale, it's like remembering that we're in a vivid dreamscape. That's what a fairy tale is. It's a collective dreaming, and that this is where we head in order to discover certain things, and the witches that we find in fairy tales are part of that discovery. And there's obviously one here, and most people know the story of Hansel and Gretel, at least on some cursory level. So you can already bring to mind what you already know about Hansel and Gretel. And it'll be a time for us today just to go in there and have a look around. And we're really just going to be with the symbols that are. We've been gifted these fairy tales by usually the crones that were out in the German countryside that were sharing these stories with their children and with families and around fires. And it's probably had so many different forms, this story. But it was one that was brought to the Brothers Grimm, who scribed it down. And we're fortunate enough to have those stories, because if it weren't for that project, then maybe they'd be lost or, just whispers in the wind.
I mean, it feels, for me, it's a very, a story that I really do remember very much from childhood, one of those that really stands out. Perhaps that's because the children are so central in it.
Yeah.
And, there's so much that is delightful to a child in there as well, and so much that's scary.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah.
So it stays with you.
It does. Yeah, eating a house and all that kind of stuff really sticks out. And then, this witch and like, oh God, what's going to happen? And the fearfulness around that, being lost in a forest. And it's a brother-sister combination. And you and I are both brother-sister combinations, right?
Yeah.
And we're sort of a brother-sister combination with each other. And then we have literally, I have a sister and Collette has a brother. So we also come from this particular constellation, even though that's obviously not necessary for any listener. Yet whatever combination, whatever you're coming from is what you're coming from, and you can add this relationship to that. And most of these stories can be read on like multiple different layers, and certainly we try to invite that inward reflective layer of the inward brother-sister combination, the inward masculine feminine sort of like weaving and waxing and weaving and waning inside and internally. And those two functions that are going back and forth of brother-sisterness on the inside. But it is just an interesting thing to pick up that, by chance we happen to be here together. And we both happen to come from that combination. And I also vividly remember the story of Hansel and Gretel. But it's funny how the memory will hold that, and there's certain things that I didn't remember until really going back into the story and gathering up these symbols and holding those symbols.
I mean, even as you're talking about the story, like there's some, I can feel the images and the memories coming to life. And it's just interesting also what you do remember before going back and hearing it again or reading it again, like what's alive still, what's imprinted deeply, what was resonant as a child that then stays with you. And being curious about what happens when you go back to those quite alive or reanimate those images.
Yeah, so as the listeners, like what happens for you as you think about Hansel and Gretel before there's a telling of the story here and before we go into it, what happens for you? Where are you drawn to? Where are you going? Just give you a moment to just sort of like allow that image to come up, because that's what the third house is too. It's those memories, it's those sense impressions. Memories are linked to emotion. That's why the moon has its joy here. And those emotions that'll be around that, and how curious those things are. They can barely be named to that level of emotionality that exists still in your childhood, but we can feel them still. And often a story or a nursery rhyme or a fairy tale or whatever it might be has still a pull on us in that way. I'm curious for yourself, Collette, what if there's any image or just like something that's just sort of sitting there for you.
I mean, the breadcrumbs.
Yeah.
I'm already following the breadcrumbs in or leaving them, dropping them.
Yeah.
And you mentioned stones, and I don't remember that, but they're so, present in my life these days. And then I'm thinking it's the forest and the house, and then there's a cage and there's an oven. Like these are kind of the main, the main shapes and images, and something around the kind of delight, the taboo delight or naughty delight of what happens with the oven, the satisfaction, because you want them to get away and you want them to be safe, or you want them to succeed, or I'm also thinking of the bone.
The bone.
And so we have like cage, bone, oven, like quite contained images, and old images as well. The bones taking me back into memory and time and what has died.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's a lot of darkness in this one. There's a lot of underworld themes going on. And as children, we have access to that. And I think there's a delight in, children want to know about witches and, scary stuff. And they want to be protected from it in some ways. They want to know that the storyteller will bring them back out. But they also want to go in. They want to enter the dark forest. And it's interesting because, I remember the breadcrumbs and all these things. And it's only by going back, and this was a few years ago, I was like, oh, these symbols I don't remember. I don't remember stones. I don't remember this big body of water or the duck. There's certain things that you just don't. I personally don't, you don't, and I wonder if collectively we have a bit of some memory not there, or maybe it's told in shorter hand to kids where some things are just left out. But it is interesting that we have the idea of follow the breadcrumbs, which really doesn't work out so well for Hansel and Gretel, as we'll hear. So it's odd that the follow the breadcrumbs has become, in the vernacular, we understand what it means. And I still use it, even though I still use that saying, even though I know they cannot follow them.
Yeah, but maybe also there's something in that of follow the breadcrumbs so that you can get lost.
In the forest.
And also the breadcrumbs go down, but ultimately it's intuition that's going to guide them. It's not going to be...
Oh, that's an interesting point. We'll get to that later, where the birds actually do guide them, and the birds eat the breadcrumbs. So interesting combo.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do is split the story up. It's what I've been doing, and splitting it up into 3 phases: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And what I've noticed in fairy tales, there's often an alchemical process of the three phases of alchemy, which is separation, ordeal, and then return. And this story works very well that way. So we're going to enter, and we're going to spend a little time in each act, basically, and then we'll wrap and find our way back out at the end, find our way back home, hopefully with some gold and some jewels, and hopefully we haven't been eaten by a witch in the forest. God, I hope not.
That'd be weird.
That'd be weird. If that's happened, please write to our families.
Tell them where we are.
So actually the story begins with a woodcutter. And it's interesting because in the first two fairy tales that I've used so far for the first house and the second house, there's been a miller. Rumpelstiltskin had a miller and the handless maiden had a miller. And in fact, the miller from Rumpelstiltskin remains a miller. In the second story of the handless maiden, the miller can't get anything from the mill, so goes out into the woods and becomes a woodcutter. So that's like the next level down in a way, like the mill's not working, so you have to go, now you're getting pretty desperate. And so this story starts with the woodcutter, no miller. You know, we're already in a pretty desperate and dire situation. And there's really a deep poverty in the family. And the woodcutter has two children, Hansel and Gretel, and a wife who's not the kid's mother. So the kids have a stepmother in this story. And so we start out with a conversation going on between the father and his wife, the woodcutter and his wife. And the wife is saying, like, we can't afford this anymore. There's really nothing that can be done. What we need to do is take these children out into the forest. We'll make a fire for them. We'll give them some bread. And then we'll just leave them there. And the woodcutter is like, there's no way I'm going to do that. You know, he's really anti it. And the stepmother's saying, well, you know, then we all die, right? She's like, you got to understand this is the only thing that we can do. And she wears on him, and eventually he agrees that this is what they'll do. Hansel and Gretel, well, I think it's Hansel at this point in the story, overhears them talking about that and chats about it with Gretel, and they have a conversation around it, and they're very scared. And Hansel's like, it's okay, I know what to do. So he goes out into the courtyard and he sees all these stones that are picking up the light of the moon, and he picks them all up and he puts them in his pocket. So the next morning, the stepmother comes along and says, come on, we're going out. We're heading out into the forest early. We're going to get some really good wood cutting done out there. You know, it's exciting times. And so they walk out together, the four of them. And every now and again, and I like the feeling of this scene, right? Every now and again, Hansel stops, turns around and stares back at the house, and he drops a stone. And the father's like, what are you doing? Come on, let's go. Have you forgotten how to walk? What's happening here? And he said, no, I'm just looking at my little white cat. He's sitting on the chimney. And the stepmother says, that's not your cat. That's the morning sun. It's just the morning sun. Let's go. But he keeps moving, looking back wistfully, throwing a stone, keeping on going, moving, looking back wistfully, throwing a stone, keeping on moving, right? And they get out into the middle of the forest, and the mother and father, the stepmother and father, light them a fire, and everything's kind of cozy by this fire. And they say, we're going to go and cut some wood now, and just rest by the fire. Everything's fine. You know, they have their bread. And there's the sound of the woodcutter, but it's actually just the sound of I think it's like a leaf going against a tree sort of thing. It's like, shoo, 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 shoo. And it's quite a lullaby sort of a sound, but it's not actually the woodcutting, because those two have headed back home. So they sleep well into the night, and maybe we can imagine around midnight, around about the time the third house is being lit up by the sun, and not being lit up at all really, because the sun's over the other side of the earth. The two of them get up, and the full moon is in the sky, and it lights the path of the stones perfectly. So they just follow the stones back and make their way back home, and they're like, we're home. And then obviously the stepmother's like, oh, how did they figure that out? But anyway, they have to obviously accept them back into the house, and then a bit of time goes by, and the stepmother again says, like, we can't be having this. We're going to have to go do it again. And as the story says, once you've said A, you must say B. So the father really can't argue his way out of it because he's already agreed to it the time before. And even though he's regretful and doesn't want to do this, he just has to because he's already agreed to it before. And so, again, this is all set up, and Hansel and Gretel overhear this conversation, and Hansel's like, don't worry about it. And he goes out to get more stones, but he's been locked out. So he can't get to the garden, and he can't bring his stones. So the next morning, they give the children 2 bits of bread, even less bread than the last time. And then Hansel crumbles all the bread up into his pockets. And this is what we do remember. He's walking along and he stops and he looks back wistfully at the house and he drops a little bit of bread and keeps moving, and then stops, looks back wistfully at the house, drops a little bit of bread. And the father's like, what are you doing? Have you forgotten how to walk? What's going on there? Come on, let's go. And he says, oh, I'm just looking back at the house because there's my little pigeon is on the roof on the chimney, and he's trying to say goodbye to me. And I just want to say goodbye and wave to him. Just like the little cat wanted to say goodbye. And the stepmother's like, don't be so stupid. Let's go. Let's get out of here. Wasting all of our time. And so he's dropping all these little bits of bread, And the same thing happens, and the same basic scenario, but they go deeper into the forest this time because the stepmother's really wanting to get them lost. They go way deep into the real heart of the forest now. And they fall asleep by the fire, and when they get up, it's like, don't worry, we'll be able to follow the bread. But when they go back, all the birds of the forest have eaten the bread, and there's nothing they can do, and they can't find their way back. And so they end up having to walk on, and they walk further and further into the forest. For 3 days and 3 nights they walk until they're getting very hungry and very thirsty, and we'll just stop Act 1 there. And this is the separation, this sort of like first thing that happens to separate us from the world that we knew and get out into the dark forest of the world that we don't know. So yeah, I'm just letting that part of the story rest, and resting on you as the audience of what you're hearing so far and what's coming up for you. And I really encourage you, if you're really in this story, because it is quite a vivid story, I think. I think a lot of us have it in our childhood. A lot of us remember this story in a way, but maybe not these little details. I invite you to press pause, maybe do a little journaling, or as we do out here in Greece on our retreat, a little movement, embodiment, feeling what you feel. So I invite you to press pause. But in the meantime, as we continue on, what are you picking up here in this first part?
I'm just really curious about when he's looking back, and the cat and the pigeon. And that's really, that's staying with me, and I'm curious, and it's kind of this sense of resistance towards leaving the known.
Yeah.
And the kind of procrastination and the kind of strong pull of a greater power that's pulling him into the unknown. But this longing to stay in the safety of home. And interesting that and then there's a playfulness there too, of him, making up stories himself.
He tells a little lie, doesn't he?
Yeah. Yeah, that's some kind of support for him, maybe, or or the cat is, the domestic, perhaps, not always. Perhaps the cat is a foreboding of the witch.
Oh, yeah.
And the bird is a foreboding of perhaps a freedom that's waiting on the other side of the journey.
What's interesting, in the first part, you get the cat, and that's when the stones are there. And it's like he will come back to the cat in a way, right? And the second one's the pigeon. I'm thinking about carrier pigeons and messages, and also homing pigeons, and the ways pigeons can be trained. These kinds of thoughts as well.
Also Hermes.
Hermes and the pigeon as a messenger, yeah, for sure. And this third house is also like after the second, and the second house is where we have our safety and our things and our possessions. And he's having to look back, and he's sort of like, there's all my things, and he's being beckoned, as you say, he's being pulled towards the third, which is the great adventure, and you have to leave some certain things behind, and he really doesn't want to do that, understandably, because he's a dangerous forest, right?
Yeah, and the only possessions he has that he's taking with him that we know of are the stones. Yeah. And then it's just the breadcrumbs, and they get taken away, and this house being about communication as well.
It is, yeah.
And also what's standing out is that it's very much Hansel's story at the moment.
Yeah.
It feels like it's the masculine inside that is maybe trying to stay in control.
Yeah.
And yeah, we don't really know what's going on for Gretel.
Not yet. Yeah. And there's a beautiful switch in the story where Gretel becomes much more in control of things in her own way. And there's a switch that begins to happen between these siblings. And yeah, so the brother is looking back, the brother is holding on. And that is a curious thing to sit with, of like, yeah, the known world and wanting to stay with what's known. It's also the stones are, firstly they're stones, and secondly they're lit up by the moon. So it's an interesting combo symbol. And stones can take us to lots of places. I mean, Collette and I were yesterday, or the day before, or whenever that is, I think yesterday, sitting on a stone at Pluto's cave in Eleusis, and just dropping into stone. We're sort of surrounded by stone as well. We're in a stone house here.
Yeah, dropping into stone consciousness. And we were really resting our back bodies into this, just the perfect temperature stone, because it was mighty hot.
It was desert hot.
Desert hot. In the kind of, maybe it was around 2:00. Yeah, just beyond Athens, in Pluto's cave, and just making offerings at the entrance of the underworld, and allowing ourselves to really drop down into the holding of the stone, and the holding of the dark, and the holding of the unknown, and how grounding it was for us to be in stone time, and to be allowing our bodies to be in communion with the land in that way. And so these stones are, and the ways in which stones can be such a resource. And yeah, I told you before about my friend Sophie, who's on the faculty in the Samovation community, and she works with the stones. And it originally came about when she was on the Samovation training, and she just started to play with the stones as a way to embody weight, and a way to be able to feel grounded and anchored and heavy and supported. And so interesting that that's a resource too in the story. Yeah. For little Hansel.
Yeah.
And not to pause away from stones, but something that was coming through as well was how Hansel taking control is in relief or contrast to the father that is, the dominant force, is this stepmother figure that is out of alignment.
For sure.
And of course woodcutter is also out of alignment, but perhaps, desperate. So there's a masculine and feminine at play that's out of that isn't connected to ground and resource, and is having to take the children into the forest.
Yeah, it makes me feel like how the children have lost their mother, which is something that's just in the background. It's not foregrounded in the story, but there's that loss. And the father's not doing the job very well, you know.
It's not protecting them.
Not protecting them. And then so the stepmother has come in. But he can still rely on these stones, which have the lunar frequency that can light up the lunar frequency. So there's still something solid. And then he's locked away from that, so he can't get that anymore. And now he's got crumbs. He's got the crumbs of bread. It's like the last thing he can hold on to. And the birds just come and eat that up, right? The birds just come and take that. This is the last bit that he could hold on to, and he can't actually hold on to that. They don't guide him back. They don't guide him anywhere. There's a crumbling there that the stone will not do, right? The solidness of stone is maybe juxtaposed to the crumbling of the bread. And bread is the only thing they're eating in this world. They just don't have the resources for anything really.
It's an interesting question of what can we let go and without having the resources, like, as well. In order to be able to descend, we often need to feel like we've got something to hold on to.
Yeah.
To lower ourselves down.
Yeah.
But this is almost like, nope. And you can't hold on to this, and you can't hold on to this, and this will crumble.
And they are referred to as like silvery coins. So there is the money of the second house as well that we're having to let go of. I'm reminded of Inanna and all of the gold and the jewels that she takes off one by one on the 7 layers. It's like, the taking off of everything that's in the second house before it, everything that is our possessions and our resources and all of that. And having to go into the forest now, which is the big and dark, scary place, you know. Certainly to the civilized world, the forest represents that terrifying underworld place of the unknown. When we haven't entered, we can project on the forest everything terrifying. But as we were just reading in the little book of symbols, like, you know, part of the forest can be the deep mother, can't it? And if in this story again, there's no positive mother figure going on. And so, of course, there's a scary mother out here. And we do find one. We do find a devouring mother in Act 2.
But they also need to go and meet the dark mother.
They have to.
Yeah.
And so we're in between, astrologically, we're in between the resources of the second and the house of the mother, which is the 4th. Usually house of father, but sort of house of ancestry, parents, the home. And so it's a little unclear of whether it's father or mother, to be honest, but let's just say it's mother for now. And so in between, that's the 3rd. And here we are in a way, and there, we can sort of open out into Act 2 unless there's anything lingering behind here that you want to pick up before we move out of Act 1.
No. I was just before I was like, should we go in?
Yeah. So you can feel that we're deep in the forest now, lost. There's really no way back. The other thing that I would say actually about that first act is like the mapping of our early environment is something that is a 3rd house thing. And part of his looking back is he's mapping, right? But he can't do it, you know. He can't do it anymore. And that map isn't being used anymore. So we're now out in the forest, and they walk for 3 days and nights. And then they see a bird who sits on a branch and sings a beautiful song. And they're like, And then it alights off of the branch and sits on another one. So they follow this bird until it takes them to an opening. And in that opening is a house made of candy and breads and deliciousness and all of those things. And so they get right to it, start eating. I think Hansel might eat part of the door, and I think Gretel like pushes out this circular window and just starts getting to work on that. They just start chowing down.
You can hear them squealing with delay.
Yeah, can you imagine after 3 days and nights how much she'd be loving that, and how much kids love candy. All the sweetness and the sweetbreads and the sweet treats, and they're getting right into that and enjoying themselves immensely. And then out comes the witch. But she's being very friendly, and she invites them in and gives them food and everything, and gives them a bed to sleep in, and they have a very restful night. But actually that was all a bit of a ruse for her. And the next day, she takes Hansel and shoves him into a cage with bars. And the plan is she's going to fatten him up because she wants to eat. See, this witch in the forest wants to eat children. That's what she does. And so she wants to fatten Hansel up so he can be nice and fat. And she gets Gretel to do all this work. So Gretel's set to work, And we get the sense of like something's shifting here, right? Like Hansel's now in a cage and Gretel's put to work. And Gretel, as she's working, she's like doing all the chores and doing all the housework and everything. She's really starting to pay attention to this house and really starting to think like, how can I get out of this situation? How can I rescue my brother from this cage? What can we do? They start to plot and scheme together, but also individually to try to figure out how they're going to do this. And the thing about witches, or the thing about this particular witch, is that she has beady red eyes and can't really see. And so she's kind of like, that's a flaw in a way, but she has keen other senses, but she can't really see. And so as time's going by, she's trying to fatten Hansel up, but Gretel gives Hansel this bone. And whenever she asks Hansel to reach out his chubby little finger to see if he's getting fat, Hansel instead reaches out a bone, and she can't see that it's a bone. She keeps feeling this bone, and it's like, it's not working, giving him all this food to fatten him up, but nothing's happening and nothing's working. She keeps feeling this bone. And 4 weeks go by, which is an interesting amount of time. It's like a whole lunar cycle goes by. And she's like, well, forget it. If he's going to be this way, I'll just eat him as he is. And so ask Gretel to start, heating up the water and lighting the oven and everything. It's like, we're going to get going here. She needs some bread, and so she's getting ready to put that in the oven because that's going to go along with the Hansel dish. And then as the oven is nice and hot, she tells Gretel to look in there and actually go into the oven so that she can see if it's hot enough to cook her brother, essentially. And Gretel says, I don't really know how to do that. Is there a way to get in there, or how do you actually go about that? How does that look? And she's like, you daft little child. Let me just show you. And she crawls into the oven, and then Gretel shoves her and then locks the door behind her and then runs off, and she's hearing the howling of this witch who's getting cooked in the oven, and she runs back and releases Hansel out of his prison, and they run off, and they run out of the house and run back into the forest, and that is where Act 2 ends.
So exciting. I can feel 6-year-old me. Like, yay!
I mean, how much do kids just as kids, we would love stories like this. We want to be afraid, right?
Yeah, the first thing that stands out is when you said, this witch likes to eat children. And you, parent or whoever's reading the story would say that to you, and you'd be like, And then she puts him in the cage.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh!
Yeah. It's something that my friend Vive, who will come onto the podcast for the 5th house, because she's really exploring pleasure and, shame and pleasure and taboo and things like this. And one of the things she talks about is how as kids we play games like hide and seek and chasey and really predator-prey kind of games, ultimately of like conceal, reveal and, like there's something dangerous going on or we'll pretend to be monsters or you see it with adults and kids are often like, rah, they're zombies or monsters or werewolves or vampires or things, right? Like there's something about play that does want to play with the dangerous, and there's this dangerous witch out here, the devouring mother. Not the benevolent mother, but the devouring one who's, instead of going to feed you and take care of you and nurture you and nourish you, she's going to eat you, fatten you up and eat you. And then there's a candy house, these kinds of things of like the sweet candy of all of that. But ultimately there's no real nourishment out there, is there, in all of that candy?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that it's the sweetness that we get first. That lures us in, and I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, so I was going to say the word lure, because it's like the thing that all kids are just going to love, right? I mean, you ask them if they're going to eat their broccoli, you can sort of trade off with kids to eat their food so they can get to their desserts, And
is it also that we can be deceived by the sweetness? And only want to have the sweetness, but we have to cross the threshold beyond the sweetness and go into that dark house where there's cages and ovens and the devouring mother.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and I thought also what was stood out for me when you were like, and now Gretel gets to work and she starts mapping.
Yeah.
The interior. And it's the inner feminine that's now doing the mapping of the interior, whereas Hansel was mapping the exterior.
Interesting. Yeah.
And how he has to be caged for her, like demobilized, for her to then animate and to take the lead.
Yeah. Yeah, it switches, doesn't it? And it's a real signature of this story, how it's sort of Hansel's story in Act 1. And in Act 2 it's very much Gretel's story, because if they're going to survive, it's now Gretel who has to find a way, essentially.
Yeah, it makes me think about you and me as well, of how we're like... one of us will go to work and then map things and chart things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sort of bring that back for the other one. Yeah, and some of the work that we've done over the years of, like we've helped each other in so many different ways, one of those different hats and sort of assisted each other through things that we wouldn't be able to otherwise get through, and just help with the tools that we have. I think that's what happens between this brother and sister. They really love each other, they really want to, they're in it together. They're the children of some pretty extreme traumatic events and they're all they've got, and they know that the only way they'll make it through this is to really rely on each other.
And to be a team.
And that means they need to really have each one stepping in with like, okay, I got this, Hansel steps in at the beginning of like, it's okay, and at the beginning, that's the scene. He's like, it's okay, sister, we're going to be okay. But then he's not going to be okay, in Act 2, he's in a cage.
Yeah, and she's like, I've got this.
Yeah, now she's got it. Well, she has to figure out a way to get it, at least.
She orients and looks around the space and sees what she can work with.
Yeah.
And uses her smarts and her wits.
And a little trickery.
A little bit of trickery.
Which they both use.
Yeah, and I also wondered if the witch was maybe like done with Hansel, thinking he was skinny, and so just
eat Gretel.
I'll just have Gretel.
Yeah, could be.
She's done the cleaning.
Yeah.
She's fulfilled her role.
Yeah. take her instead. Yeah.
What else do you see that remains imprinted from that?
I guess I feel the cage and the bars and like what it's like if I just enter the Hansel space of being caged. It actually takes me into a different fairy tale, quite a famous one amongst men's work, because Robert Bly made it quite famous, the story of Iron John or Iron Hans. And in that story, there's a wild man in the cage. And the little boy has to sort of make some kind of a connection because his golden ball falls into the cage or rolls into the cage. And now he's forced to make a connection with the man in the cage. And in this case, the boy is caged. It's him that's in there. And if I just feel into that, so this connection that as a boy's rite of passage, like the sense that you are caged or the sense that something is caged, something is having to be really held back here. That boyishness and that liveliness and everything is now locked away. And then I'm just sort of entering that cage. It's like a cage. It feels very dark to me and the bars are there. And he's really now, there's nothing he can do. His only trickery is to keep putting that bone out. That's just buying time. And now he's at the whim of these external forces, where at the beginning it was all up to him,
He has to turn towards his sister, though, doesn't he?
He has to rely upon his sister.
That she will. And so this caged boy, or the caged masculine, the feminine is somehow freer.
Yeah.
She's able to move, and that part of his psyche, he has to turn towards that part to.
Yeah, I'm thinking about sort of a third house theme here would be rational and intuitive, the rational and the intuitive. At the beginning, it's a very rational thing. It's like, here's my plan, get the stones, put them down, then we can find our way home, which worked once but didn't work twice. And then now it's like, no, lock up the rational side. And the intuitive has to be like, okay, where am I going to see an opening here? Because that's not a plan. She doesn't know that she's going to get that opening. But when she gets the opening, which is like, now I can, she's waiting for an emergent moment, a moment of weakness, where the witch actually gives her that opening to push her in there, right? Like, she's waiting and intuiting and mapping and sensing. She's very much in the fluid, in the feeling.
Trusting and listening and waiting. And we're also in the deep feminine, aren't we? If we're in the woods. And going back to that, it's Hansel's story in Act 1 when we're in the rational, we're in the outer world, and then we go in and we're in the forest, and then we're in the house, and then we're in the witch's realm.
Yeah.
And that, that's when Gretel can step in and animate.
Yeah.
Animate.
And if we feel out of the original safety comes from the rational, and then the next level of safety comes from the irrational or intuitive, imaginal. Having to think outside of the boxes that you're put in.
And in the concealed.
Yeah.
In the depths.
It's a sweet story in the sense that they save each other. They both get a turn, It's a fair story in that way. And when one doesn't know what to do, the other one does. I think that's a nice way to look at rational and intuitive processes and just have like, sometimes you really do need to just nut it out, be rational about it. And sometimes that's not the way. And that's third house, because sometimes it's like Hermes' time, or the Mercury's time, let's say. I just got to figure this out. It's a puzzle to be worked out, and I'll just work it out. And sometimes it's very lunar, It's like all of your puzzle working outering isn't going to get it done. You're going to have to rely on a different function. And, we were talking about inferior functions, which is a very Jungian term. Which of these functions for the listener is you feel is superior and inferior. It'd be different for different listeners, but definitely culture-wise, in the West, the intuitive is the inferior function, So individually, no, that's going to be different from person to person, but culture-wide, it tends to be that you get a lot of reward for being in the rational and a little bit of demonization, witching, being in the irrational.
Yeah, a word that sticks out even when we looked in the book of symbols around witches, one of the first words was negative. And also like that not necessarily meaning bad, but being like in the kind of that which is in relief or that which is opposing that's the demonization of the witch.
Yeah, which we can see and feel here, and it's like how to be with that, and also like it's fun to have a Baba Yaga and a witch figure as well. So kind of like not trying to do that thing of like, well, so let's clean it up, or like it's great, but it's like witches and zombies and vampires and werewolves and all these creatures that are in the night world are like, they're a bit scary. But then each one of those, if we get in touch with it, has, we can go to the scary place and then hopefully retrieve something of the inferior function that has been locked in there, right? Which in a sense, what happens to the witch is that she's put back in the hearth, isn't she? She goes back into that fire. Yeah. She goes back to the origin and the...
I was just wondering that.
Yeah.
Like, what does it mean that she goes into the oven and she kind of stays in the oven and she gets locked in there? But going back to the hearth.
Yeah. She returns to something... I mean, she's burnt, like, obviously it's gruesome and violent and all of that. The wailing and everything, but there's also on a deeper mythical level, you can feel her like Hestia, who's the goddess of the hearth, is the heart of everything, the hearth, even in the interior human system, there's the heart there. In any house, there used to be the hearth there. Even in our galaxy, there's the galactic center, which we can imagine as like the pulsing heartbeat of the galaxy. In the earth, there's the core of the earth is this hot, pulsing fire.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if that in the psyche of the story, that the mother returns to the heart. So this mother wound of the children. There's a lost mother.
Yeah.
And there's a dark mother or that energy of absence. And then they put that into transform.
Yeah.
There's an alchemy, of course, to the burning and the, transforming.
And then the grado or the darkness is put into the fire. So there's a meeting of the Saturn and the Sun in our chemical process. And that's what I didn't mention in this part, is then they find all these jewels and gold and everything and stack their pockets with the riches. And that's an alchemical process, right? This is what can happen in this deep, dark part of the story.
Yeah.
When things get most dark and out of control, like the dark night of the soul.
It's heart alchemy that's at play.
It's heart, yeah. And that's when we find those inner riches and start to actually like honor ourselves of that, overcome those negative impressions and voices, and sort of rebirth ourselves out of that.
Yeah, go and meet the dark mother and transform our relationship to
exactly
her.
And therefore to the earth and to those frequencies and to water and earth as they are, and to the intuition. Something you can deeply rely on now, something that actually, it's like the fire is lit again.
Right.
And there was no fire in that first scene, there's a cold, there's a coldness in that whole family system at the beginning. There's a cold rationale to being able to just leave your children in the forest.
Such a bitch.
And she convinces interestingly, it's the feminine that convinces the masculine that's a good idea, and he goes along with it. And now all of that comes back around, that negative force, or that shadowy force, that shadowy shade of that energy is being transformed.
Well, that kind of, that mother wound.
Yeah.
That's playing out.
Yeah.
At the beginning, and then, in that kind of dark mother stage. Something was coming through about the heart. No, it's gone.
It might come back.
It might come back, yeah. I mean, I guess them now returning to the hearth and reigniting that fire and the transformational process that's happened by coming into relationship with that wounding or that loss. I mean, I guess it means we have to go into Act 3 because I'm curious about how do they then find their way out of the forest.
Yeah. And so they've packed their pockets with jewels, everything that they can, and they wander out and they happen upon a large body of water. And they look for a bridge to cross and there's nothing, and they look for a ferry or a boat or something and there's nothing. There's just this one white duck sitting on this big body of water. And Hansel jumps on the back and says, "Come on, Gretel, come on, let's get on." And Gretel says quite wisely, "No, it's one at a time." And so one at a time they cross over. And when they've get to the other side, they see their house over the other side and they come back to their own house. And it's just their father there because, oddly enough, their stepmother has died in the time that they've been out and have now returned. And the three of them rejoice and they empty their pockets of all the gold, and they come back together in wealth and in richness of the soul and spirit. And that's how the story ends.
Yeah, it reminded me of what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Because, it's around that archetypal energy of mother, and it's not that we go back and then they've got he's married a new wife who's perfect or something. Yeah. It's like, oh, you're the mother I always wanted. It's like they can find that healing of mother and reclaim. I mean, there's loads of my projection, of course, onto the story. But
as it should be.
Yeah, of course. And, and so the forest is the mother, the hearth is the mother, the water is the mother, the stones, the moon, the bird, all of the guides.
Yeah, even the duck.
And the duck. And the duck, and the crossing. And it's interesting then that it's Gretel waits in the heart of the mother, and the feminine stays in the feminine a little while longer, while Hansel then crosses over first into the kind of outer world again, and then she follows. And there's a mothering in Gretel there, as she also no, you go first. Yeah. So there's a kind of protective quality that I sense there of her taking care of her brother.
Yeah, I love this part of the story. Again, I don't remember this part from the originals. I don't remember a big body of water or a duck from my childhood.
No, me neither.
But to me, it feels like an individuation process, and Gretel understands that now, that they can't go together now, right? And Hansel does not get that yet. Maybe because he didn't do the act, right? He didn't have the agency. So he thinks that they're still in it together in the way that they were before. But something's transformed and changed, and it's like the ferryman in many different traditions, but certainly mythically for Greece, there's Charon, the ferryman, who'll ferry you across. And it's that idea that that's a single file, and that we have to go alone through that one. And even though these guys have been the best team and it's been so good, if they were to go together, then they haven't really had the signification of like they grew up just now, they went through it, and they have to go it alone now, which is they'll still always have the love, but they won't have the same sibling reliance, sibling dependence that they did before. They needed to say, no, now I am me and you are you. And Gretel has the knowing of that. And then once they've ferried across, they can be separate individuals that have now, perhaps we can get that sense of like integrated that, like Hansel gets to integrate his Gretel side and Gretel integrates his Hansel side. And they can move as more full individuals. And that is the purpose of alchemy, right? Is to become oneself and not project one part out and only have the other part. Now they become whole with that body of water, with the duck's help.
Yeah, and he's taking that part of him inside himself, and so she can wait while she has a moment to let that part of him integrate inside of her.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the return is there's a resolution and a resolve, and there's the gold. The gold has been retrieved, essentially, which is a classically alchemical symbol, that the gold was retrieved from the underworld. That's why Pluto also means wealth. And it specifically means agricultural wealth. I find interesting. It's not necessarily that means gold and riches in that way.
It means nourishment.
It means nourishment, and it means the things that you plant down there in the underworld tend to come to fruition in the upper world, and they were able to be separated. They didn't want to be separated from their original situation, but by the time they've come back, they have a better situation, right? They have a better home, a better house, a better hearth, a better way to be, and they could only really do that by going deeper and deeper into the dark forest and finding the witch and finding all of that, and even getting lured by the candy. And then they make their way out, and it's interesting because they make their way out into a healthier home in a way, and that's where I see at the bottom of the chart, and the home in the fourth house sort of takes us out of this first three houses, and we sort of enter the next three. It's like the first quadrant is complete. I find it really interesting that the images of the first three fairy tales have been so oddly similar, by chance, where you've got the poverty of the early experience, and then some kind of a trial, and then the recovery of some kind of gold or riches, in the second house, in the handless maiden, and going through that loss of the hands and the feeling function and recovering it.
Yeah, so much gold and silver.
Yeah, all of that. The silver hands, and then the recovering of the feeling. And so, what are we left with here with Hansel and Gretel?
I mean, I'm thinking, and I'm probably jumping ahead, but because you were telling me about where Cancer is moving at the moment.
Jupiter into Cancer.
Yeah. And this body of water, and as you're going into the fourth house with the mother, and it just feels like a sweet transition. And a beautiful mapping of the story onto that house, if the water leads us into the fourth house and into that realm of the mother.
And the ancestors, part of crossing that big body of water is all the ancestors that are under there, everybody that's come before us, and some deeper honouring of them.
Yeah, and also you were saying that you weren't sure if the crossing of the river, like Hansel and Gretel, had they actually died.
Yeah.
I just didn't to play with that, but then that's an interesting thought of then leading us into ancestry and death and...
Yeah. So once we enter those water houses, it's a little bit like, ooh, this area. Yeah, the dead are lurking in here. They're around, and we have to remember how to honor them and their journeys and really be with them again. Re-enter, make connection, find the ability to ritualize and bring them into our worlds again.
Yeah, and lean into that.
Yeah.
All the support that's waiting for us there.
Which is maybe the gold hidden in the deep, dark house in the middle of the forest where we're scared to go in there and we think we might find really ugly things and devouring things and things we don't want to see. But really the only way to retrieve that gold is to go in there. And then that gold becomes part of the house in the everyday world, doesn't it? The house in the everyday world is a different house. The house we left at the beginning of Hansel and Gretel is definitely a different house than the one we returned to.
Yeah, I'm feeling like, well, what does it look like when, Dad's there chopping his wood?
Yeah.
And there's, just a sense of space and ground. Something's opened up.
Yeah.
You can be welcome back in. I mean, they're going to have all sorts of father wounds now, though, aren't they? Because you just left us in the forest.
Yeah, there's got to be some conversations.
Yeah.
Which is also, it is considered the fourth house to be the house of the father in many, many different ways of thinking. So we also enter the fourth that way. Okay, so the story had to end there, but it doesn't have to end for our imagination of like, what's that conversation like, as you say, like, what the fuck, Dad? Really, though?
And why did you marry that woman?
Yeah, what's going on, man?
What were you thinking?
What's going on?
What were you
This
drinking?
Is a bad choice. Red flags. Oh, beautiful. Well, thank you, Collette, for joining me, and how cool to sit down here in Epidavros and record something together in person.
Yeah, well, pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
How do we close up our episode in the third?
I don't know, but I can just hear a baby screaming in the background.
I can
like,
as well.
what does that mean?
Yeah. New life, we'll say. Baby screams in the background, and we're reminded it's time, and we have to go out for dinner now, and we'll celebrate all of it, won't we?
Yeah. And then we're going to go into the forest.
We're going
together.
deep into the forest.
We're going real Hansel and Gretel.
Yeah.
Deep into the forest on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Sunday today.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we have...
And I mean, this podcast will be released on Thursday, Friday, depending where you are in the world. So by the time you receive by the time you hear this, we'll be in the forest.
We'll be just emerging out and heading up to Delphi.
Oh, will we?
On the Friday.
Okay.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So we'll be going to receive some prophecy.
Yes.
From the Pythia.
Yeah, from the oracle.
Yeah, but before then we'll be going deep down into, we're going to go down into the support, the steady support. We're not necessarily, forest maybe not, we're going deep down into the stone. Into the stone,
yeah, for sure. Into the land of Asclepius's place in the Abaton, in the incubation, and in deep places of psyche, the places that don't necessarily come out into the light and make a big song and dance, but instead take you down into deeply restful places. And that's where the origin of healing is, down there, in that deep parasympathetic nervous system, unwind, relax, restore. And hopefully we can send some of that across the airways, because as you listen to this, we'll be somewhere down there.
Yeah, and then you can come join us next time we do.
Come join us next year. Now
Next time
the
we do Mythosoma.
Now there's the plug. Mythosoma 2026. Get on the wait list. Wonderful. Thank you, Collette, and thank you for sharing yourself with the audience who already know your voice, but I'm sure they enjoyed hearing you, not just over the computer waves, but right here sitting in person and in Greece, no less.
Yeah, very special. Thank you, love.